One of the questions I seem to be getting a lot right now is there a difference between fasting and time restricted feeding? And so for me, I basically feel like they're exactly the same thing. But the one thing is that time restricted eating, one looks at the fasting window and one looks at the eating window. But I feel like people just kind of get caught up in that of, what's the difference? Time restricted eating usually is for smaller fasting periods, and they say intermittent fasting is for a longer window. And again, one looks at the eating window, one looks at the fasting window, but really they're basically the same thing. So don't get caught up in that. Now, another question I get is, do the benefits and weight loss of fasting simply come from eating less food? And that is part of it, because if you're eating in a smaller window and you're eating when you're hungry and when you're full, the caloric restriction is part of it. But it's not the only part. It has so much to do with hormonal changes, and it also has a lot to do with your glucose. So, some people are doing a 16-hour fast with an 8-hour eating window, or an 18-hour fast and a six-hour eating window. But the biggest thing for me, when I personally did an 8-hour eating window, I didn't lose any weight at all. And the reason is because it always depends on where you started from. So before I knew anything about intermittent fasting, I was eating in about a 9 to 10 hour eating window just in general. Right. So when I went down to an 8-hour eating window, and it wasn't because that's just what I was doing. I was eating in a 9 to 10 hour eating window. When I went down to eating an 8-hour eating window, I personally didn't lose weight. And I've noticed that for women, for them to lose weight, once they move to a 6-hour eating window, that's when they start getting a bigger hormonal response. They're getting lower insulin levels, and then that's where they're getting potential a lot more fat loss. They're also getting growth hormone benefits and so forth. So for me personally, I'll share another question I get is, what is your favorite formula of the way that you like to fast for the highest weight loss? So for me personally, I do 4 days a week. I eat in a 6-hour eating window. And so my latest book is called One Meal and a Tasting. And what I did was I interviewed over 1,000 women, and they literally said, they would never tell me they do intermittent fasting because they don't even know they're doing that. But most of the time they're like, I don't eat breakfast. I'm not really hungry. I usually eat lunch around 12, and then I might eat dinner around 5:30 or 6. And so every person I would do that. And they're like, I usually have something small and then at one meal and then a bigger meal at the next time. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what I realized is that they were eating one meal and a tasting. So that's the majority of how I eat, is almost every meal I do one meal and then a tasting. And in my book, I talk about how these girls have all these tips and all these tricks in there to be able to do it without them even really know that they were doing it. So it's funny because I would interview them and it's like, I'd say something like, well, it kind of seems like you're kind of eating one meal and then a tasting. And then they'd be like, well, I guess you're right, So anyway, for 4 days, I basically eat from 12 to 6 in about a 6-hour eating window. One day a week, I try to shorten my eating window to only about 4 hours. And then one day I try to do a 24-hour fast at least once a week. And then one day a week, I just take off and I eat in about an 8-hour window. So a lot of times on Saturdays, I like to make a late breakfast and then I like to go out to dinner with friends. And so instead of eating from 12 to 6, maybe I start eating at 10 and then maybe I'm not done until 6. And then sometimes it's even longer. Maybe it's 8, 9, or 10 hours on that day. Most of the time it is only 8 hours. But like on Saturdays, maybe I'll do 11 to 7 or 11 to 8, something like that. And that's my one day that I'm not really fasting in a big, long window. I kind of take off that day.
So let me ask you this. I know that sounds kind of synonymous, in many brains as calorie counting, because you're eating fewer calories if you eat in a smaller window. And also your Saturday almost sounds like other people's, and I hate this term, cheat day. Don't cheat, just don't overeat, but enjoy your food. But let's say you have your 10 to 7. Does that mean that if you haven't really eaten that much during the day, you're definitely not going to allow yourself to eat after 7, like at 8 or 9? If you've only eaten a little bit during the day, it's mostly time with you?
So my next question I'm going to answer is, are you strict with your windows as far as 6-hour eating window or 8-hour eating window? My windows are always based on my hunger and fullness, but I do stretch myself with that being said. So if I say I'm eating in a 6-hour eating window, I don't go, okay, it's 12 o'clock, boom, start eating. And then I don't say, it's 6 o'clock, I have to stop eating right then. It's not like that. Everything that I do is based on hunger and fullness, but I've trained my body. So right now where I am, it's 12:35. And it was so funny because I told my friend around 11:30, I'm really hungry right now. So I would have normally eaten at 11:30, but I wanted to be mentally sharp for recording today. And so I was like, I'm not going to eat anything right now, but I did have a little bit of coffee. And I would have black coffee or black tea or green tea. I like green tea with hibiscus. But because I didn't want to eat, I had a little bit of cream in my coffee, just a touch, to kind of extend my eating window. Because today I knew I wasn't going to be able to eat until more like 2 o'clock. So that's another hack that I talk about in my book, is that I don't have coffee with cream in the morning. And the reason is because I want to have a clean fast, and I want to be able to just have black tea or green tea is what I normally have. I have green tea with hibiscus every single morning.
And the thing is, the cream does have sugar in it and has some fat. And so that's
the cream
I was referring to.
Yeah, the cream I don't really have. I guess you could argue it would have sugar in it.
Natural sugar.
But natural sugars, yeah. I don't ever put any kind of sugar in my coffee, but I'll put a tiny bit of cream in there. But I don't do that until about 11:30 or 12, to then take me another hour to 2 hours if I'm trying to go longer. So it's just, again, I'm training my body to do that in that, but I never am dogmatic about it. I try to do it as far as how hungry am I and how full am I. And the biggest thing is that it's okay to get hungry. One of my interviews that I did, she used to be Miss Virginia, and her name's Catherine, and you can listen to one of her episodes on my podcast called Waste Away Through Intermittent Fasting. But what she always says is that she says, I love to get hungry. She's like, when I hear my stomach growling, she gets excited. She's like, my stomach's growling. I'm hungry. Now let me see if I can wait a little bit longer to push myself. Because when your stomach is growling, it's literally like fat is your body, it's kind of like that Pac-Man where it's like, I know my body's eating fat. And so now I can go ahead and use that. Instead of using glucose for fuel, I'm now using fat for fuel.
Now, it's important to note, ladies and gentlemen who are on here, that doesn't mean like, oh my God, I know I should eat, and you get dizzy or you get lightheaded or fog brain. No, it's just like, you start feeling true hunger, not just a craving on your tongue, true hunger, and wait a little bit. So it's not good to go on like, no, I'm going to fast no matter what. No, it's not that. So Chantel's not saying that. I just want to make sure people understand that. The other thing, Chantel, I would love to address with you is people ask me, I'm afraid of intermittent fasting because I'm afraid in those windows, the 4-hour or the 6-hour window, I'm going to binge. Talk about binge eating. Do your clients approach you with that fear or that concern?
So I will tie that into of how do you increase your fasting window, and how do you, what I say is, how do you train your body to be fat adapted, and what does fat adapted mean? So Fat adapted is basically a metabolic state where your body has been in ketosis long enough, and then you basically transition, instead of using carbs and sugar for your fuel and how you get your energy, your body says, okay, I'm not going to get sugar. I'm not getting glucose. I'm going to have to use fat for fuel. And so what that means is that your body has to get used to it. And some people say it takes 3 weeks. Some people it takes 6 weeks to get fat adapted. And so it's what the analogy I like to give is when your body, my favorite analogy is, let's say I have money in this account over here in the bank, and my bank is about 15 minutes away. Or if I have cash in my pocket, let's say I want to buy something for $50. I can either, if I have the money in my pocket, if I have $100 in my pocket, then I'm just going to take the money out of my pocket and go ahead and pay for it. But once I run out, that's when I'm going to go to the bank to go get more money. The same thing happens with you as fuel. So if you've got glucose stored up, if you have sugar stored up, your body is first going to use that. The bank is kind of like the fat that you have. So what I say is that you should just slowly build up. So I started out again as an 8-hour eating window. That was very easy for me. Then I moved to a 6-hour eating window. Then I moved to sometimes doing a 4-hour eating window. Then I throw in some occasional fasts for 24 hours or 48 hours and so forth. But again, you build up to it. And the term we use is called fat adapted. And so what you have to do is you have to ask yourself the question, what are the best benefits that you see from fasting? And so when you start going, I'm going to have increased energy overall. I'm going to start healing my body. If you have psoriasis or eczema or skin issues, it's going to help that. I had a friend one time that had an injury, an Achilles injury for a year. Her Achilles hurt so bad, she tried everything. She couldn't do it. And she ended up doing a 5-day fast. Now, don't panic when you're listening to this, but she literally did a 5-day fast. Her Achilles was better than it ever had been. And so fasting has massive, massive amounts of healing for your body. So again, before I started fasting and intermittent fasting, I was actually pre-diabetic. And so when you say you're pre-diabetic, I would test my blood sugar in the morning. I would prick my finger, and your blood sugar should be below 100. And if you're between 100 and 120, you're considered pre-diabetic. And every morning when I did it before I started fasting, I would wake up and I was about 100, 103, 104, and I was pre-diabetic at that time. Now that I've been doing fasting, if you take my blood sugar when I wake up, my blood sugar is around 70 to 80, which is absolutely phenomenal. And so I reversed my pre-diabetic ways just from doing intermittent fasting.
And I would add to that, that's mostly because your insulin wasn't spiking. I know in the 80s, yes, I'm that old. In the 80s, it was about grazing all day. Oh, you should be grazing all day. Well, that spikes your blood level, and people were eating every hour. Personal trainers at the gyms were telling you, oh, you should be grazing all day. Well, that can spike your blood level and spike your insulin. So that makes all the sense in the world. And just to reiterate, Chantel, what you're talking about is the body needs time for reparation and maintenance, for reparation and restoration. So that's probably what you're talking about with the psoriasis, the acne, the Achilles heel, all of that. Your body has time to actually work through the process that it needs to and repair cells, repair damage, repair inflammation. And so I just wanted to add that on to really to highlight that.
Yes. One question I get all the time is, what can I drink while I'm fasting? So even if you have black tea or if you have black coffee, which black coffee, depending on the coffee, can be anywhere from 3 to 5 calories, I don't consider, and almost all of the intermittent fasting gurus and specialists would say to you, it's fine to have cold brew coffee, black coffee, green tea, all of those would not break a fast, and obviously water. One of the things people always ask is, does bone broth break a fast? And it absolutely does. But I use bone broth when I'm doing an extended fast. So if I do more than 24 hours, or if I'm doing a 48-hour fast, but I still want to be in a fasted state and I want to keep getting my body healed, if I'm doing a healing fast, I will have a little bit of homemade bone broth, and that really does help me. Or I'll have a little bit of salt. I'll take a little bit of salt and put it on my finger and have some. And a lot of times when you're not feeling good, fasting, having a little bit of salt will help you. Another huge thing that will help you is if you go for a walk. Going for a walk is, to me, I call it my magic elixir, because it's unbelievable. I will literally be like, there'll be days where maybe it's like 10 o'clock or 10:30, I'll say to one of my staff members, let's go talk and walk. And it really helps, because what happens is when you go for a walk, it really regulates your overall blood glucose and blood sugar. And so that's what happens. It's really magical. I will literally be like, I'm starving. I need to have something to eat. I'll go outside and go for a walk. I'll be fine, and I'll be able to go another hour, 2 hours, or however long I'm looking to fast. So that is a really huge benefit that I'll do when I want to. Or another trick is I will have a little bit of salt on my finger, because a lot of times your electrolytes are off, and that makes a really big difference. So what do you do when you are in a plateau of weight loss?
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is to change up my eating window. So what I always say is that your body is very much like going to the gym. So if you went to the gym every day and you literally did the exact same thing and you never changed anything up, your body would get used to it, and then it has a stall. So you want to go to the gym and do different things and change up the weight. And the exact same thing needs to happen with intermittent fasting. And if you noticed what I said, one day I might do 8 hours, one day I'm doing 6 hours, one day I'm doing 4 hours. I'm also increasing my walking. So if you're not, for me, when I am looking at a plateau, I will add in a 3.5-mile walk 5 to 6 days a week, in addition to whatever other workout I'm doing, to get my body moving. Because sometimes what happens, for example, this morning, I worked out really hard with really, really heavy weights, like massively heavy weights. So that's why at 10:30, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm really hungry and I don't want to eat right now. So adding walking in doesn't make me ravenous. So that's a really great kind of kicker to get my weight loss. And I also add lots of veggies, more veggies, because I want to make sure that I'm having enough fiber in my diet. And so I really look at my sugar content. So I just say, okay, in my diet, how do I reduce the amount of sugar and carbs? And in my first book, which is called Waste Away Through Intermittent Fasting, I interview all these women and they give these little tips. But one of them is when they're having an increase in their weight, they always start looking at their carbs and sugar, and they don't deprive themselves, but they just cut back and they start increasing their protein, increasing their veggies. And then they also say, okay, I'm going to change up my eating windows. Maybe one day I'm just eating one meal, and maybe one day I'm having a meal and a tasting. But if you read my book, One Meal and a Tasting, there's all kinds of different hacks and different ideas to help you get out of that plateau.